Welcome to another episode of A Salt and Buttery with Intent to Satisfy. Tonight's episode is we are going to start making some dal. It's an Indian dish. It's made with 3 types of dried beans, okay? This can seem a little bit like a lot of work, but the end result is actually quite tasty. And even for people who prefer not to eat vegetarian, this is a very, very tasty dish. So let's go ahead and get started on this. And it is simpler than what it seems, but we have to pay attention to some of the details, okay? So the first step, which I really recommend starting the night before, is we need to soak the beans. Okay, now I've already sorted them. Now the reason you have to sort the beans is because sometimes, especially with large amounts of beans, you can end up getting small stones in there too because of the whole picking and processing and everything. Sometimes a few stones end up making it through. And anyone who's eaten something and accidentally bit into like a seed or something like that, very, very not good. So we want to try to avoid that whole situation by making sure there are no stones in this before we even start. So as I said, I've already started that. Now, we use 3 types of beans. There is a fancier name for each one of these. Okay, but I'm just going to go with the American version of the names because I will mangle the name otherwise. Anyway, first thing is black beans. So named because of this. Now, one disadvantage with black beans is when you soak them, they do have a tendency to stain the bowl. As you can see, I have soaked previously in here. I have some stainage. We live with it. The next bean is kidney beans. Now you can either use the large ones or the small ones. I prefer to use the smaller kidney beans. Okay. They're closer in size to the black beans, so they cook pretty much at the same speed. Now comes the chickpeas, or dried garbanzo beans. Now, this is one of the places where we end up running into a slight cooking issue because it takes the chickpeas, or dried garbanzo beans, longer to cook than it takes the other 2. So we end up having to cook a little bit longer, so we end up with not crunchy beans, but it does not hurt the consistency overall. Now, technically, you could probably make this all with canned beans, but I really don't want to do that because then the beans do end up too mushy, and you also end up with more salt in it, and you have less control over the overall flavor. With this, I have more control over it. Okay, now, next step, we just add water. So, ta-da! Because these beans are going to swell up to at least twice their size. So we want a pretty good amount of water in here. Now, I'm using filtered water simply so that I don't get the nasty, we have a couple bean skins, which we're going to pull out, and they float up on top, which makes it really easy to find them. So, anyway, so we want to make sure that the beans are covered with at least 2 inches of water. I prefer to do 4 inches simply because I'm a little bit paranoid. Okay, and it's okay. More water is just fine. So then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to cover this. I actually sit like a plate on top of it because it doesn't have to be sealed airtight, just to keep the dust out. Okay. So I just put a plate on top, keeps the dust out, also helps keep curious kitties and puppies and birds and everything out of it, okay? And hopefully slows down curious children, but for that purpose, we're going to put it a bit up and away. Now, you don't really want to put this in the refrigerator because for some reason, and I've tried this before, it actually ends up slowing down how fast the beans absorb the water. So we just want to set it in a bowl covered with water, or the beans in a bowl, cover them with water, put something on top. It can be a lid, it can be plastic wrap, it can be a plate, just something to help keep dust and everything from getting into it and keep out curious paws, noses, fingers. Yeah, and just let it sit overnight. Then tomorrow we will rinse these and we will start them cooking. And that's when things get a little bit more complicated, but one step at a time, we can make it through this. This is so worth the effort. I think you'll be pleased, okay? So I'm gonna set this aside. It'll be ready for tomorrow and we'll go through it, okay? One step at a time, we can do this. Thank you. Okay, now we're on to the next step of the dal. We've soaked the beans at least overnight. They can soak longer, okay? Now, at this point, I'm going to drain and rinse them. So let's see if I can get things set up so you can actually see what I'm doing here. Adjust. Okay. Now, to rinse, you want to use a strainer, okay, like a colander or something like that. I happen to have a pretty good one there, but you can use a plastic one. You just need to make sure that the holes are small enough so that the beans will not fall through, because that would be a bad thing. Then you end up losing all your beans. And then you want to rinse them really well because the water that they've been sitting in is not so awesome. Now, any beans that fall in the sink, I'm not going to grab because the sink is not sterile. I did empty it, but as you can see, we have the beans. Now, the black beans have stained the chickpeas a little bit, but everything will still be good. So, now we need to switch positions. And the next very simple step is we have water here. Now it is, if you're doing a single batch, it's 6 cups of water because these are going to swell up more as they cook, which they're supposed to. And as usual, we have the hair tied back and we have washed the hands. Now what we need to do is get this water heating up. We want it to take it to a simmer, okay? A simmer is lower than a boil, but still definitely some constant action in the water. It's little bubbles going zzz, kind of thing, okay? And once we get it simmering, we're going to put the lid on it and we're going to let it simmer for at least an hour and 15 minutes. I prefer to go a little bit longer because the chickpeas do take longer to cook. We want them so that they're all nice and swollen and the skin is splitting on most of the beans. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to let it simmer for at least an hour and 15 minutes, check on it, and probably go a bit longer because, like I said, we want the chickpeas to actually be cooked. So I'm going to bring this to a simmer, put the lid on it, and just let it go for a while. So once you get that going, go have some fun, go do something else. And this is a step where you can definitely be doing it in a slow cooker. If you're doing it in a slow cooker, do it at a low, not the keep warm, but a low temperature on the slow cooker, and leave the lid on, and you can let it simmer all day. That's fine. Okay, so we'll be back in a bit. go have some fun, okay? Don't leave this unattended because we don't want it to burn, but you don't have to stand here in the kitchen waiting for it. So once it's simmering, just put the lid on, walk away, just monitor to make sure it doesn't start boiling too much, because then things start burning and sticking to the bottom. Okay? Great. We'll be back. Okay. Now we're starting on the next part of the dal. This part is making what's called the tomato masala. Okay. There are a couple specialty ingredients in this. I'll point them out to you because I'm keeping the beans simmering while I work on this, because, as I said, we want them to be nice and soft so that it's pleasant to eat instead of crunchy. So one of the first things we do is we put some oil in the pan and we start heating up. Okay? You don't have to take it really hot for this. I know technically I'm supposed to get this hot enough that it crackles and makes the seeds pop. It's not necessary to take it that hot. You just want to get it hot enough to start releasing some of the scent. Okay? So, and it's a little bit scary for me if you take it so hot that it's crackling and everything like that. Okay? Now, we're going to start adding more spices. Okay? Now, I'm going to let this heat up just a little bit longer because I'm not smelling these yet. Okay? Once I start smelling them, then they're hot enough. Okay? And now, I'm starting to get that. So, now one trick that I do, this is a combination paste of ginger and garlic. Okay? See? Nice and hot. Okay? Now, you can do it separately, or you can use something like this. This saves me some work. Okay? It is not necessary, but it makes life a little bit easier. Okay? Now I'm going to add some chopped up tomato and chili. And at this point, you get to start deciding how hot you want this to be. If you want it to be hotter, you can use a spicier chili. You can use more chili. Okay? But we need to cook this down a little bit because we want these tomatoes to cook. And this does not take long to do. Okay, so I'm turning up the heat a little bit and doing this. Now I'm adding this. It is a deggi mirch. Okay, it's actually a special type of chili powder. Okay, specialty ingredient. I know. We're using a couple specialty ingredients, but it's okay. Cook. Now we want these to cook down. Now you can use a regular tomato, or you can use a Roma tomato. If you use a Roma tomato, you actually get a little less liquid, okay, which, since there's so much water still in the beans, that's what I prefer. And then there is one more specialty ingredient, okay. Its nickname is called hing, but the real name is, and I would probably mispronounce it, okay. So, but the nickname for it is hing. Now, the purpose for this is it gives just a little bit of almost a lemon, hint of lemon, without using lemon. Now, it doesn't taste quite like lemon, okay, but it starts working on that. Now, do you see the color this is now? Part of this is because of the tomatoes cooking down. We don't want them to be totally to mush. And part of it is because of the spices that have been added. But this is cooked enough. Okay, so see, we have here, it's a nice, see the consistency? It's got some creaminess to it, but it's still got the chunks. That's what we're looking for. So I need to switch positions now. Okay, so I'm going to pause you, switch you over. Now, next step. Okay. As you can see, the water here has turned really dark because of the beans that were cooked in it. Okay. Now I'm going to take and put the masala that we made. Mix that in. Now I am actually making a double batch of this because this is good and we're going to be sharing it with a bunch of friends. So life is good that way. Okay, and I really enjoy it when I can cook for friends and things. So now see that? See how we still have the chunks of tomato in here? Yeah, and the chili and everything else. This is so good. Now what we're going to do is now we stir in some tomato paste. Yes, I use the canned tomato paste. It is easier that way. Okay. Now, technically, this is a vegetarian dish. You can get away with doing it totally vegetarian, or if you want to, you can put in some cooked chicken or something like that if your family is more comfortable having a non-vegetarian protein in their meal. But this is pretty filling on its own, and it can be served over rice. It can be served with naan bread. I really like to serve it with naan bread. I like naan bread. Okay, now we're stirring in some butter, and this is part of what makes it vegetarian but not vegan. And the butter adds a lot of richness and flavor to this. Now we want to stir this around and keep it simmering until all that butter melts. Okay, which is not going to take very long. So we are going to do this and come back in just a couple minutes. Okay, now this is a step that if I had had the butter at room temperature, it would have gone faster, but it did not take very long. As you can see, the butter is almost totally dissolved now, and this butter adds a definite richness to this. Now what we're going to do is now we're going to basically finish this. Okay, we've added everything else, and we have this all simmered together nicely, and the butter melted in. Yay. Now we turn down the heat really, really low. Okay. Now we want to let this simmer for about 15 minutes at a low heat, okay? Because that helps get the flavors all working together. So I'm going to let this simmer. I'll come back to you in just a couple minutes, and we will go on to the next step, and we'll finish this up. How do you like that? We are almost done. Okay, now as you see, this has been simmering for well, you don't see this part. It's been simmering for 15 minutes. This is what it looks like. Okay, it's in some ways it's got some a consistency similar to a minestrone. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and finish this. And that means we add the last couple things to it. Okay. So now what we're doing is, at this point, we're adding the salt. Okay. We do not add the salt before this. Now we're adding either heavy cream, sour cream, or yogurt. I actually like to use kefir, which is kind of a split between sour cream and yogurt. Okay, it's a little bit thicker than some a little bit runnier than others, but it works really well for me. Now, last ingredient. This is a specialty ingredient. This is called fenugreek, and I've ground it up so that it's finer. You don't really have to grind it up. It just dissolves in easier if it's a powder, or at least as close to a powder as you can make it. For that, if you really want to do that, I would recommend possibly like a small spice blender will do the trick. A small coffee grinder will do the trick. Okay. Now, as I said, this is a specialty ingredient, so this is what this looks like. Okay, so you can find it yourself. Once again, Amazon is our friend. And guess what? It is done. It is ready. I'm going to be serving this over rice. I'm going to be serving this with the naan bread. Now, one other trick you can do is, because people like different levels of spice, make this as spicy as you want it. Okay, as you want it. But serve it with yogurt. Yogurt is a trick that I learned from some friends that helps cool down the spiciness for people like me that are kind of a wimp. Okay, like I said, make it as spicy as you want to, but serve it with the yogurt. It cools down the spice and really helps. So, and the rice helps some too, but the yogurt is what really does the trick with it. So, once again, this was dal, D-A-L. It's a little bit more extensive of a recipe, but one step at a time, we can get through this. As you saw, it's not really that hard, but the flavor combination seems like it's much more complex, much more difficult to make than what it is. So it's kind of impressive. Anyway, thank you. Once again, this was A Salt and Buttery with intent to satisfy. And thank you, and let me know what you think.